welcome to Live with Lewis for May 27th, 2004. Hi, I'm Tim Gore, enrichment teacher for the School District of Clayton, Missouri, and part of your Lewis and Clark Then and Now education team, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's webcast. Today we're coming to you from New Haven, Missouri, a quaint town that's located in the rolling hills and valleys of eastern Missouri, right along the Missouri riverfront. And we're going to have the chance today to take you on a virtual tour of New Haven, Missouri, and give you the opportunity to see some of those town's highlights. We're also going to give you some video footage of what happened on the river this week, so you know what's going on with the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles as they move on up the Missouri. And we're also going to have the chance to talk about a member of the original expedition who has descendants that live in the New Haven area. That's John Coulter. So Jim, if we could begin with, I'd like to go to some footage of our location today, which is New Haven, Missouri. Here you see a town, the town sign of historic New Haven. As you can see, established in 1836, and here you see a beautiful picture of the riverfront area of New Haven, Missouri. The historic downtown is located right along the riverfront, and then there's a very high bluff above, and this picture gives you that image. You're going to see a white building there in the center of our picture. That's the Walt Theater, an Art Deco movie house, which you see an image of here from the 1940s. And we're actually webcasting today from inside that theater, which through the years has been restored lovingly, so that when you see it today in this image, you know it looks amazingly like it did in the 1940s. A labor of love for the people of New Haven as they engage in their historic renovations. And now we're inside, and then there you see the folks who have joined us from New Haven. We've got students here from the middle school in New Haven. We've got students here from Campbellton Elementary as well. And then we've just got the good townsfolk of New Haven. So I want to say welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for coming. Yeah, feel free to wave to the camera at this moment in time. Work that out of your system if you want to. That's a perfectly good time to do it. Great. As is usual at the beginning of each one of our webcasts, we want to give you an opportunity to learn a little bit about what's been happening as part of the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles has been engaging in their real-time reenactment. They've just returned to the river, as it were. Obviously, on May 14th, they left Wood River 200 years ago to the day of the original expedition, crossed the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippis, and went to St. Charles, where they participated in the National Bicentennial Signature event, which lasted from May 14th to May 23rd. They left St. Charles on May 21 as part of one ceremony, obviously, 200 years to the day of the original expedition, and then to be part of the signature event for the weekend, they returned and had their grand leaving, so to speak, on May 23rd. And we want to give you a chance to look at some of that footage, as well as what else has happened on the river this week. So we'll begin by looking at the St. Charles closing ceremonies. The closing ceremonies began on the parade ground in St. Charles. You see the lowering there of the Spanish flag, the French flag, and the American flag. Those three flags, of course, representing the three powers that had ruled over the territory of St. Charles during the course of its history. And naturally, St. Charles had just become a part of the American territory as a result of the Louisiana Purchase, which had just been ratified in 1804. There you see members of the Discovery Expedition marching down to their replica boats. You see Scott Mandrell, who is Meriwether Lewis for the expedition, and Bud Clark, a great-great-great-grandson of Captain William Clark, there in the hat, along with other members. And now you begin to see the keelboat shove off. That's Jim Rasher in white, one of the major boatwrights involved with the expedition. And you're going to have an opportunity to see. It was an absolutely gorgeous day. Here you have the red pirogue as well as the keelboat. Since that period of time, the Discovery Expedition has enjoyed the wonderfully wet weather that eastern Missouri has been getting over the course of this week. And they've had to deal with some torrential downpours, and they've had to deal with a little bit of lightning and a little bit of hail. And obviously the Missouri River is up. But there you can see that on this day, it was an absolutely glorious day as the keelboat and the two pirogues headed up the Missouri River from St. Charles. And their first step after that was, of course, Washington, Missouri. Washington, Missouri, just a few miles upriver, and here you see them coming into Washington, Missouri, the bridge behind, the keelboat and the two replica pirogues. Again, they were blessed with excellent weather for the ceremony and decided not to rain until afterwards. The keelboat coming into dock here. There's about 40 members of the organization who are part of the expedition right now. The members of the organization rotate in and out, so they take like 2 or 3 week terms, so to speak, for the time of the reenactment. There they are marching into Augusta, dressed, of course, in their military uniforms because the expedition was a military one. They'd spent their time in Wood River organizing themselves militarily. Here we are at La Charrette, which means, of course, Little Wagon. La Charrette was the last trading outpost, Eurocentric trading outpost that existed in Missouri that the men were going to see for an awfully long period of time. From here on, they're going to head up the Missouri River into Indian territory, Indian country. And obviously there are major Indian groups in this area. Here's Mr. Brown, who's done a tremendous amount of loving work at this La Charette trading post, talking to Scott. This is actually a pirogue of the time period, of the early 1800s. He's got his replica forge there that he actually uses. You're going to see a number of tools. And this trading post is a wonderful replica located in Washington, Missouri, just about an hour west of St. Louis. Easy to find, where you can get a really good understanding of what a trading post of the time would have been like. This is an interior room, working fireplace of the time, the ability to cook, the ability to actually use all the materials that you see there. And in a moment, as we pan across, you'll see the bedroom, the whole area. So it's all fit for that period of time. He's been working on this since the late 1960s, so it's certainly a labor of love for this man. He's found a lot of the items actually there in the Washington area. He's been able to dig up a number of them himself. And otherwise, he travels around the country seeking, obviously, items of that time period, or in some instances, replicas, obviously, of the time period. See some beads there, which would have been a major part of the trading post time frame for the Indians. The Osage Indians, the Missouri Indians, the Oto Indians, and the Kickapoo would have all lived in this area during the time of the original expedition. Now the crew is in Maysville, Kentucky. Now you can see Marthasville. I said Maysville, Kentucky. We were Maysville, Kentucky months ago. Marthasville, Missouri. It rained a little bit on them there. They engaged in a gun salute, which we'll see here. Those, of course, are replica weapons of the time period of the original expedition. Some of them muskets, some of them rifles, but of that time period of the expedition. Again, the organization, for the most part, dressed in military uniforms, unless, of course, they are reenacting a voyageur, which are engagés, which were important parts of the expedition. This woman here is Marilyn Geary. Marilyn is the widow of Peter Geary, who is one of the major driving forces behind the Discovery Expedition. Peter died just this January, and the folks of Marthasville honored her with that marvelous portrait of she and her husband that they had made. And so that was a wonderful opportunity for Marilyn. And it's certainly been a great opportunity for the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles as they began the reenactment again. They're looking forward to heading on up the river. As I mentioned, we've had a lot of rain here, so the river is definitely up, flowing a bit faster perhaps. And, of course, the expedition does indeed have their motors on their boats so they can deal with the safety issues that occur as a result of a fast-moving river, or if a barge decides to come at them, that kind of thing. It becomes extremely important for them. One of the really exciting events that happened to the Discovery Expedition when they were in St. Charles occurred on May 21st, 200 years to the date of the original expedition leaving St. Charles. And Bob Plummer, a member of the expedition, was like fishing around in the waters of the river, getting rid of debris and things that had washed up alongside the boat. And he noticed this yellow thing bobbing in the river. And he thought to himself, that's kind of odd. Why would this yellow thing be bobbing in the river? But he started to bat it away. And then he noticed that it had student names on it, kids' names on it, and it had drawings on it. And he wondered what it was, and he picked it up, and out of the river he fetched a yellow canoe that had been made, and in that yellow canoe at one end of it was like a film canister. And inside that film canister was a note from the 4th grade students of Mrs. Ogle in Campbellton Elementary. And we have the opportunity to meet some of those students right here today. So I'll invite them to come up right now. Tara, if you'll join me here right next door, and then Lindsay and Adam to them, and then we've got some other ones that are going to appear right behind us. Ralph, if I could ask you a minute to just slide the camera over, that'd be great. We want to make sure we can get the kids in the picture, too. So first of all, what I want to do is let you all have a chance to introduce yourselves. So talk to me loud and proud. Who are you, young man?
Brandon Shields.
Thank you, Brandon. And this is?
Donnie Woodstock.
Thank you, Donnie. And over there on the far left is?
Gabby Borcherding.
Thank you, Gabby. Now, Tara, you're going to have the chance to tell us a little bit about this project, right? Now, you guys go to Campbellton Elementary. Your teacher's Mrs. Ogle. And so she came in one day and said, okay, I want you guys to do this canoe thing. How did this project happen? What were you doing?
Well, it was something to do with Lewis and Clark, and we sent it down the river, and it ended up in St. Charles.
Now, were you the only school who did this project, or were there a bunch of schools in Missouri who participated?
Actually, I think there are a whole bunch of other schools that participated.
There were indeed a whole bunch of other schools that participated. And so, Tara, I'll ask you to switch out and we'll bring Lindsay in, because I want Lindsay to give us some information here about the project, too. Take a seat, Lindsay. Hopefully it won't tip over on you. Ooh, almost. So, Lindsay, when did the boat go in the water?
On April 24th.
Okay, so it went in the water on April 24th, and did you guys put it in the water yourself, or did somebody do that for you?
No, Mr. Ryan's group put it in there for us.
Okay, and did they put it in at New Haven, or was it in another location?
It was at New Brunswick.
Okay, and New Brunswick, is that further west along the Missouri River from here? Is that closer to Kansas City and Columbia than we would be to St. Louis?
Yes.
Okay, so they went in on the river there on April 24th. Very good. Now, Adam's going to share some information with us about when it was actually found. So it's April 24th. The boat goes in the water. May 21st, nearly a month later, Bob Plummer's fishing it out of the water. He finds it, opens it up, and is amazed to realize that Campbellton Elementary has sent a message. Now, what did your message say in the boat?
It said that we had put the boat, that some people had put the boat in at New Brunswick, and if anybody found it, they would,
They were going to contact you?
yes,
Okay, so Mr. Plummer did find it, and did he contact you guys?
yes,
Okay, so then what happened? Have you had an opportunity to meet Mr. Plummer?
yes,
So did he come to your school?
yes.
And what did you guys do?
He told us that he had found it, and we were really excited, and we were jumping around and things.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, did you guys think that anybody would find your boat? How did it feel to actually have your boat found by somebody else?
We were very excited.
I would think so, because it's amazing to think that the boat actually survived and was found. I just think it's very cool. One, it was found, but two, it was found 200 years to the day that the original expedition left St. Charles. It was found by a group of people who are engaged in a reenactment of that expedition, and that you guys put it in the boat. So, Adam, to you and to Lindsay and to Tara and to everybody else from here, thanks very much for doing it. We're glad you did, and you planning on doing any projects like this again in the future, do you think?
Yes.
Excellent answer, Adam. Your teacher is now very proud of you. Thanks very much, guys. Let's give a big hand to the folks from Campbellton Elementary. And the kids probably know this, but to make sure that our web audience knows it well, that little boat is going to go into the Discovery Expeditions Museum in St. Charles. So if you go to St. Charles, their Boathouse Nature Center Museum is located right on the riverfront in St. Charles, and you can have the chance to see that boat and hear about its story. And we're really glad that you guys were here. Thanks very much for joining us. That's a really cool project, and it's so neat that you were able to find it. Now we're going to have the opportunity to do a little bit more about the time of the expedition in this particular area of the country. John Coulter, of course, was a member of the original expedition, and family members of the Coulter family live in the area. And we've been joined now by Scott Mandrell, portraying Meriwether Lewis. Come right on in, Scott. I will give you over the microphone. We've had the opportunity so far to meet the students from Campbellton Elementary who put the boat into the water, and to we've had the opportunity to see some of the footage from this week on the river. So we're going to have the chance to...
Tom, take him back outside and bring the boat in.
So for those of you on the web who aren't able to see this, Seaman, the Newfoundland dog, had arrived in the movie theater. We're always worried about Seaman chewing up the cord, so to speak, in the cable. So he's been escorted out, and we're going to have the chance in a moment to bring the actual yellow boat in so that you can see it on the web. So let me just ask you, we've had lots of rain lately. Why don't you describe for the folks what's it been like on the river?
Well, oddly enough, I mean, despite the rain, and people are want to complain about it, the rain that we're getting right now is actually in an exact parallel to what happened 200 years ago. You know, we hear a lot about global warming and all. I can assure you that there has been nearly no change in the weather in 200 years. The journals reflect over the last few days that there has been heavy rains, et cetera. In fact, last night we were, unfortunately, because of the heavy flow, we were forced to move up the river a little bit last evening. And just like the original expedition, we ended up spending the night on Bates Island, and which is about almost 10 miles upriver from here. Last night, the river right now outside is running, and so people also understand. We've talked in the past about the fact that we have engines on the boats, and it's important for people to understand how drastically different the rivers are. The river outside right now is running in excess of 12 miles an hour. and it's carrying a very, very tremendously heavy debris flow with it. And last night we actually experienced a 5 to 6 foot raise in the river last night where we were tied off. We tied off last night. We were looking at the bank of the island well above us, and by morning you could have stepped off the boats right onto the island, onto the high ground of the island. So it was a tremendous amount of rain. In fact, we actually took a lightning hit last night.
So how many miles upriver have you guys headed from St. Charles now?
Well, we're sitting right now at I believe at 98. So we're almost 100 miles up the Missouri River now, approximately 70 miles up from St. Charles.
Oh, very good. And Tom Iyer, a member of the Bitterroot Corps of Discovery from Idaho and also of the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles, is going to give us the chance now to see this boat. Thanks very much. So this right here is the boat that the students from Campbellton Elementary put into the water. Here was the film canister.
Right. It was a great story. We were actually, there were a lot of debris had gathered around the boat when we were in St. Charles. And when, in the course of cleaning it off, Bob Plummer, who I think that many of our viewers may have seen and met before, who portrays Monsieur Deschamps, who was one of the French boatmen, he was cleaning the debris away, and he noticed that there was a strange yellow object, one piece of debris that didn't quite look like it ought to be there, and he fished it out of the water, and it had a lot of writing and designs on it. And as he looked it over, he actually picked it up, and I'll show it for the camera. He picked it up, and it's apparently it's made out of a piece of landscaping timber. And he looked at it, he said, well, that was very strange, and he turned it over, and lo and behold, it was a model of a dugout canoe. And in that canoe was a film canister that had been put inside of it, and inside the film container was a laminated note.
Yes, and the students that we just met had the opportunity to tell us about that note, but it says that, Dear Canoe Project, we're the 4th grade at Campbellton Elementary in New Haven, Missouri. There are 19 students in our class. We're preparing for the MAP, the Missouri Assessment Tests, and Terra Nova tests. Always a good thing to put in, that you guys are preparing for tests. Very good. So we are very busy getting ready to test next week. Each student got to design a small section in our canoe. They used Sharpie markers and pencils, and each design is a personal favorite of our initials. This is our first canoe project, and we're excited to see if the canoe will complete the trip downriver. And sure enough, it completed it all the way to St. Charles, and then Bob Plummer was able to fish it out of the water. That's absolutely cool.
I think it's particularly interesting. I mean, anyone could have perhaps found this, but I think it's really exciting. Hopefully for the students, I know it was exciting for the men of the Discovery Expedition for us to be the ones who found it, because it's one of those connections that we set out on our journey to make, and we're very happy to have made that connection with the students here at Campbellton.
Very good, very good. So what we want to do now is give you a chance to learn a little bit more about the town of New Haven itself. So we're going to hear about John Coulter, who was a member of the original expedition, and some of his descendants who lived here. We're going to have a chance to look at some video footage of the Coulter Memorial. So I'm going to take a moment, Scott, to switch out of here and let you take this chair.
Thank you.
And we're going to be joined by Ralph Haynes.
Hi, Ralph. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good.
I apologize for my late entry, but it's been quite a 48 hours on the river, I assure you. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about, first of all, a little bit about the town. I don't know if you've already covered this with the founding of the town, but if we could talk a little bit about the early origin. Obviously, when Lewis and Clark had came by here, there weren't any inhabitants in this community, really. In fact, we know that Lewis and Clark, in fact, record the fact that they had not encountered any Native Americans from the time they left St. Charles until they reached the mouth of the Platte River, and as they made their way by here, surely there had been trappers and the like who had made their way by here, but there was no settlement as such.
No, there wasn't. New Haven got its start as a steamboat stop, fueling stop, where they took on cordwood to run the boilers, and began as Miller's Landing. And
what year was that?
1836, I believe. And the name was subsequently changed to New Haven as a town developed around what was a wood stop. But one of the interesting things is also this is where John Coulter spent his final years. We don't know a great deal about how he spent his final years, but he spent them not far from New Haven, and in fact is believed to be buried not far from here.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more about what brought him here? Why was this a place of interest? Do you know?
We don't know. We did know that we do know that he had a farm, a plot of land near Newport, which is about 5 or 6 miles up the road, and married a woman named Sally. Had one son named Hiram, From that one son who had 9 children of his own, we now have probably over 1,000 documented Coulter descendants, many of whom are still in this area.
I remember when we began our journey 8 years ago that I remember very well when we came to this area being approached by people who indicated that they were members of Coulter or of the Coulter family, and that was new to us. We were just learning ourselves as we began our exploration of the men of the expedition, and it was really gratifying to be able to learn from the people who had descended from him in this area. Now, do you know, was his property here, was it the land warrants that he had received?
There's no documentation of that, none that we've been able to find right at this point. But there's always hope that something will turn up, and in fact, research continues. But we do know that he ended up here. There's a mystery around where he's actually buried. There are 3 possible sites. One was a place called Tunnel Hill, which was when the railroad was widened in 1926, some human remains were unearthed there. There's a very good chance that we're going to be able to do some forensic work to do some DNA identification to determine that these are or are not the remains of John Coulter. It's unlikely that they are, but we can't say they aren't until that work's done. The other possibility is some folks feel that he would have been buried next to his son Hiram on a family plot, which is not far from here. And then there's a third possibility, and the evidence seems to be pointing to that possibility that he may be buried in a family plot overlooking the river that's currently on private property. Someday we may know more about it, but right now the mystery continues.
And the National Park Service has recognized this community as the final resting place, at least the general area of John Coulter. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think part of the key to all this and figuring out where he actually is buried is to understand how the nature of the river and where Beff Creek enters the river has changed over time. In Coulter's time, it was about a mile farther east than it is today, and it's only been recently that folks have kind of begun putting that together.
And we have a lot of insight into Coulter's role in the expedition. He was obviously figured prominently in the expedition. There's a lot of reference to his involvement on the journey of discovery that was taken 200 years ago. Is there any local lore that pertains to that, or how does the community remember him, or what are the stories that seem to persist about Coulter's involvement with the expedition?
I think that New Haven, one of the exciting things that Lewis and Clark have brought us is a rebirth of interest in New Haven's history, its connection to the river, its historical roots to the river, and I think that folks now are just beginning to get interested and say, hey, this is a part of us. This is a part of our own history, and it's really very unique. And I think that we're having a much higher levels of the awareness of the Coulter connection as we go on.
Right. Well, that's one thing that obviously so many communities we passed through last year as we were making our way down the Ohio had some claim about the person was from that area, or they lived out the remainder of their lives there and that sort of thing. And it is exciting that now as we move into the West, particularly since so many of the men of the original expedition received Western land grants after the expedition, that we're now going to be encountering communities where not only the communities were their history begins to some degree, their Eurocentric history begins subsequent to the expedition, but that many of the members of the original expedition ultimately did settle in those areas and actually became founding fathers and some of the early shapers of those communities. I think one of the things that a lot of people are always interested in is, what about New Haven today? What is, you talked about it starting as a wood stop for the steamboats, and out west in Montana, I know they call those, a lot of those places, they call them wood hawkers, the people who would gather wood, bring that down to the steamboats as they went by. But as the town developed over the years, subsequent to John Coulter's life in this area and those early years, what was the story of New Haven? How did it evolve? What was the economy like here? What spurred the economy and caused the diversification of industry and all that brought settlement here?
I think maybe we can get Nathan Bailey up here to speak to this.
Very good.
Is one of our aldermen, and
all right, great. We're going to have Mr. Bailey join us, Nathaniel Bailey, Nathan Bailey, I'm sorry, and he's going to come up and tell us a little bit about the community. Welcome. Thanks for having us. I enjoyed meeting you yesterday. I'm sorry we didn't get to spend last evening with you. I was tied to a tree on an island. Literally.
Good to know that you stayed tied to the tree and you didn't float back downstream.
Well, fortunately, Seaman was up in the middle of the night letting us know that the river was rising because he couldn't get to the land anymore. But tell us a little bit about the development of the town, if you would.
Well, I think that we've come to grow as pretty much an industrial town, and I think another term that comes into play would be a bedroom community, in that the people who've settled here in New Haven have grown pretty comfortable, as I have. My family's been here some 40 years or so. And it's come to be a place where we've had some light industry. As a matter of fact, that's what first attracted my family here 40 years ago, as my father worked in what was known as the tent capital of the world, as our weekly newspaper still hails it.
Explain that a little bit, the tent capital.
Yes, the Hawthorne Industries Kelwood community had a factory that built tents, constructed tents that were known throughout the world. As a matter of fact, I remember growing up that there were highlights when Sir Edmund Hillary would visit town, and the president of the firm would put him up, and they were close friends.
So it's likely that Hillary on his expeditions was using tents made in the community?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we know that our tents have been across the world. Likewise, another industry that was a mainstay here in town was a hat factory here on top of one of the hills that I suppose we could say probably put hats on people all over the world. I don't know any notables who were here, but it was one of the bigger industries. We have a local bottling company that still thrives and is a pretty big employer, distributes Pepsi-Cola products throughout the area. But a number of small industries that have employed a number of the people of town, and our location does make it also possible for people to access other county areas in the St. Louis area, being about an hour out for a commute to work and to come back here to live and enjoy life.
Well, obviously, the river would have been the early conduit for commerce, as people would have made their way here by water. And as many of us are aware, the Missouri River does not play the role that it used to play with regard to commerce. There is not as much commercial traffic as it used to have on it. But the railroad is an important part of your community as well, isn't it?
The railroad also, its location just following along the Missouri River, through the years has provided a means of hauling in goods and carrying goods out of the area that has facilitated our development. As you said, the river, which once was a commercial means of transportation, has now become pretty much a recreational venue as fishermen and vacationers enjoy the river.
And modern-day explorers.
Absolutely, and such as yourself. And I think also, as we've talked about before, that there's been a real resurgence to what lies in our backyard, that Missouri River, and this has been a great opportunity for us to give some attention to that river that a lot of communities just don't get to enjoy, and we have access to it on a daily basis. And I think that's a key thing, that a lot of the things that we who live here have grown up with through the years that we sometimes take for granted, that now we're getting to turn our attention to some of the things that are really unique to our area and that people would actually come from miles around to enjoy, and we get to enjoy it on a regular basis.
Well, speaking of coming from miles around to enjoy things in the community, one of the things, obviously most of the people who are going to visit your community are going to come by land. They're going to drive here. And I think one of the things that people are going to be surprised as they find their way across Missouri and they come into this region are the number of wineries that are in the area. Can you tell us a little bit about the wine industry here in your area?
Well, New Haven is one of the many areas here in wine country where the hills, the topography is just conducive to the wine industry. We do have a few local wineries here in town, east of town, just to the west of town, that the grapes grow well, the product grows well, as many of us New Havenites know, because it's our responsibility to go out and visit these establishments from time to time, and we would invite others to do the same. But they're good for the growing a wide variety of different grapes that the wineries use to make various products. It makes for great recreation to go out and enjoy Saturday, Sunday afternoons, and just the scenery from those areas are great, and the company is good also.
It is spectacular, and we would invite people, many of our audience that's watching are people who are not just students, but we have a lot of general public that's watching as well who are preparing to make their own journeys following the Lewis and Clark Trail across the country. And we have a number of members of the expedition who this was their first time to visit this region, and I can assure you that it is a spectacular part of the country. It's really quite beautiful, and oftentimes people don't know how beautiful the rolling hills of this area are and the exposed bluff line along the river valley are. So we certainly would invite people to make their way. I think one other thing we want to talk about today is the mural project that the local school is involved in, and I don't know, is there someone else we want to bring up to discuss that, or are you familiar with that project?
Well, is David Minke here today?
Is David here? Great, very good. Well, thank you again, Mr. Bailey. We appreciate you being here with us today as well. We're going to be joined now by David Minke, and once he gets up here, I want to tell you, thanks again. Hi, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, we've got some dry weather. We've got beautiful weather outside, and today we're inside. Yesterday it was the converse.
Right.
And but at any rate, we were happy to be here. And I saw you yesterday operating the local museum, and
Correct.
I saw there was no shortage of books in there with your name on them.
Well, we've been interested in local history for a long time, and we enjoy sharing our past, especially with our young people. And we hope that they will develop an interest in history. I think your expedition is something that will stimulate that, and I certainly encourage them to take part in everything that they can in terms of learning about history, become interested in local history, and become active in their community.
Well, very good. And to that end, obviously, the canoe project that found its connection to us downriver was a tremendous example of the way that you're using history to engage your young people about your own about the own heritage of this community. But tell us a little bit about the mural project, if you would, and maybe we'll be seeing that. I believe we've got some video footage of that, and we can take a look at that as you explain it to us.
One of the things that we did as we were planning for the Bicentennial was to try to come up with ways in which our young people could be involved in the celebration. And so we went to the art teacher at our high school, at New Haven High School, and suggested that possibly some of the students would like to do a mural for the north wall of our visitor center. And they were quite eager to become involved, and they came up with a couple of ideas, and during the course of the past months they've worked on that, and that mural was finally erected back about 2 weeks ago, and we're very happy about it.
Well, it's a great addition to the community. How are we on time? Are we
We're very good on time, and we've got time for questions from the audience at any
great.
point you want to go to it.
Well, we're going to go to questions from the audience in just one moment. And in fact, I think for any of the guests we have, or for myself, or Mr. Gore, in fact, if it deals with the education issues or the technology here with Mr. Sturm. But I would also like to remind our internet access audience that they can join us or send us emails via lewisandclark@clayton.k12.mo.us. And that's, once again, that's Lewis and Clark, LEWISANDCLARK, @clayton.k12.mo.us. Do we have questions now from the audience? Do we have some audience members?
Come right over here, young man.
And make sure you tell us your name as well, so we can.
And your name is?
Dylan.
And you live here in New Haven?
Yes.
And what's your question?
How long did it take to make the replica boats?
Oh, how long did it take to make the replica boats for you guys?
Well, that's a great question. It's actually a multiple-part answer to it. The first boat that we had ever built was actually built almost largely by one man, a man by the name of Glenn Bishop. He started construction back in about 1983 after having built a model, a 1-inch to 1-foot scale model, and it took him about 13 years to build the boats, which the first boat, the one keel boat by himself in his backyard. And unfortunately, after our first expedition in 1996, which actually brought us right here by your community, in January of 1997, that boat burned. We had already constructed the whole of the White Pirogue also, but both of those boats were lost in a warehouse fire. But due to the interest and the publicity that was generated at that terrible moment, of the loss of those boats, a lot of volunteers came forward, and what happened was in 1997 we were able to complete, in about 7 months, we completed the White Pirogue, the smallest of the 3 vessels, and in 1998 we were able to complete the Red Pirogue in about 8 or 9 months. It took us to get that one ready for the water. Now the new keel boat, the replica keel boat, was a 3-year project. We began work on that in 1999, and it wasn't completed until the summer of 2001. So it took about 3 years to build that boat. We have over 11,000 man-hours in that boat.
Very cool. Thank you for that excellent question. Anybody else have? Yes, young men, come right on down here. And what's your name, sir?
Zach.
And Zach, where do you go to school?
Right here.
Oh, very good. And what's your question?
How long is the trip going to take?
How long will the trip take?
Well, the trip will take as long as the first trip took. For me, Lewis, I portray Lewis, and Lewis was the one member of the party that was on the longest, since he was sort of the one gathering and recruiting the other men along the way. It's 3 years and 3 months from the time I left Washington, D.C. last year. Essentially July 5th of '03, whether it's 1803 or 2003, until 23 September of '06. So it's about 3 years and 3 months all told.
Good question, thanks. Yes, young lady, come right on over. The angel in the red shirt. I'm seeing the name on your t-shirt there. Yes, dear, what's your name?
Shaylee,
And what's your question, Shaylee?
is it fun being a reenactor of Lewis and Clark expedition?
It is fun being a member of the expedition, and it's not just fun, it's something that we take very seriously. This is an unusual reenactment. A lot of time reenactments are very brief, and they're just to give people sort of a slice of life, but we feel that in many ways that we're not just reenactors, that in many ways we're on an expedition of our own, and much like the original expedition, which was charged with not only charting the course of the Missouri River and exploring that, but learning about the people and the places along the way, we're trying to do the same thing. And much like Lewis and Clark recorded the stories and of the Native Americans that they met, we're trying to document the stories of the new Native Americans, people like yourself and your communities along the way. So it's a tremendous amount of fun, and it's a tremendous responsibility, and we take it very seriously.
Thank you, Shaylee. I'm seeing more hands. Yeah, come on up. Come on up. And you are?
Megan Bauer.
Megan, what's your question?
How big is the boat?
I'm sorry?
How big is the boat?
Well, the keel boat is 55 feet long. It's about 8.5 feet wide at the beam, and the beam means its widest point from gunnel to gunnel on the outside. It has a 14 by 10 covered cabin in the back where 4 men have bunks and to sleep in there. The rest of the men that are on the keelboat crew actually sleep under a wall tent that was constructed over the hull, much like we know that from the designs and the drawings that Clark made at the Wood River camp. And it also has a 10-foot covered bow, which one man sleeps in, and there's also storage in both the cabin and the bow as well. It weighs 9 tons when it's empty. When there's nothing in it, it weighs 9 tons.
And at times during the original expedition, the men actually had to get it out of the water and drag it because the water was too low in the river.
Had to drag it right through the water. Now, the 2 smaller boats are about 40 feet long, each of those.
Oh, I've got lots of hands going up. This is absolutely great. Yes, come right on up. You are?
Claire.
Okay, Claire, what's your question?
Are you guys making more maps with your stories on them? Like points where you found something new and learned something new?
Great question, Claire. Thank you.
That is a terrific question, Claire. In fact, what you're part of right now, you're part of our map making right now. We're making our maps electronically, as it were, and we do use GPS, and we work very closely with several federal agencies in terms of how the river differs today from the way it did then. And along the way, where they would have marked campsites, we're marking towns, and we're describing those environments and those areas. But I'll give you a very quick example of one place. Lewis passed by a place on the Mississippi River down below St. Genevieve on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, and when he passed by there 200 years ago, 206 months ago now, he indicated that there was a place where there was evidence that people had been working stone, that it was a quarry. Now, when he passed by there, he didn't really have much of an understanding, as no one really did in those days, of much more than a few hundred years of history. But thanks to a group by the name of the American Society of Amateur Archaeologists, who we met with as we passed that very same site that Lewis marked on his journey as a quarry site where people were gathering stones and working stone, we found out that that site that he thought was probably only maybe a few hundred years old, that Native Americans and early settlers was using, was actually one of the most important Dalton sites in North America, and that there were Native Americans and Aboriginal people who were indigenous to North America had been working stone there for over 10,000 years. And that we were able to document that and share that with the people of the world through the internet. So yes, we are doing exactly that. It's just that we're not using walnut ink and parchment paper. We're using the internet and new technology.
We're going to go to 3 more questions during the webcast, and then if we have more questions than those 3, then we can answer them after the webcast is over. So I want to go to, oh my gosh, look at all these straining hands, big time straining hands, straining hands, straining hands. I'm not going to make everybody happy, but you, young man, look like you're straining very hard, so come right on up. Your name is?
Spencer,
Go for the question.
why did Thomas Jefferson choose you for this trip?
Good question. Why did Jefferson choose Lewis?
Well, that's an excellent question. There's a lot of reasons for that. Jefferson had just become president at a time when there was a lot of turbulent politics going on, and politics today, as vicious as they may seem, were pretty tame by comparison to what was going on back then. And he needed someone that he could trust completely. And the Lewis family had grown up about 7 miles from Monticello in a place called Ivy, Virginia. And Lewis's father and his uncles and even his grandfather had known Thomas Jefferson. And so Lewis was someone who he could trust. Also, Lewis was a unique young officer. He had gotten in a little bit of trouble in the Army when he was a few years prior, and one of the things that had happened was he had been assigned to become a paymaster for the frontier. And as a paymaster for the frontier, he had the experience of being alone and being out on his own and being familiar with how the Army was working on the frontier. And so his Army experience, his personal experience with Jefferson, and also because Jefferson knew a lot about his family, he also knew that Lewis was particularly versed and familiar with things like frontier life and skills. He was familiar with the plants and animals of Virginia, and it was very important that Lewis not waste his time on this trip identifying plants that were already known to science. So the fact that he already had a working knowledge of the flora and fauna of the eastern states was important, and his personal relationship with Jefferson. This was a secret mission when it began, and it was important that Jefferson could confide in him.
Great question, thank you. Our next to last question. Yes, young lady, you're straining well as well. And don't worry, if you don't get your question asked during the webcast, we will take the time to ask them at the end. And you are?
Laura,
Laura, what's your question?
how many people did you take on the trip?
When Lewis and Clark passed by, originally Lewis thought that he was going to take about 15 to 20 men all told. That was the original plan. In fact, when he got his provisions at Harper's Ferry, he only got 15 of everything. And it was when he started making his way down the river that he realized he was probably going to need more. And when they hit the Mississippi, they realized going against the current, they were definitely going to need more men. By the time they left Wood River, Clark and the party under Clark's direction was 42. When Lewis joined the expedition, it grew to 43. Now, there's some speculation it may have been 44, but roughly 43 people passed by your community, where your community is now, 43 people. Ultimately, on their trip to the ocean, 35 people made it to the ocean, but 3 of those people were not people who actually passed by here. 3 of those, at least, were individuals who they had met further up the river, and that would have been Charbonneau, his wife Sacagawea, and their young son Jean-Baptiste.
Thank you for that question. And someone's going to get the last word of the day, so to speak, the final question, final question, final question, final question, final question.
Mr. Gore, this young lady down here has been really, really patient.
She has, but we had the chance to talk to Tara earlier.
I apologize.
So you wouldn't have known that. Oh my gosh. All right, Mr. American Flag, come right on up. And you are?
Austin,
Go for it, Austin.
what kind of animals did you kill?
Ah, very good.
Well, just about anything that we could. That was one thing that, as we look back at the expedition, they killed a lot of animals, and it wasn't because they were just being ornery. They were actually trying to collect specimens of them for science. So the largest number of animals that they killed would have been deer, buffalo, and elk that they were gathering for food purposes. But any time that they saw an animal that was new to science, the reason that they killed the animal was so that they could examine it more fully and do detailed anatomical drawings of it and anatomical descriptions, which were very, very important to be communicated back to people like Jefferson and Peale, who ran the American Philosophical Society, so that we could grow our body of knowledge. And it's very fortunate in some ways that they did kill some of the animals that they did and were able to collect those specimens, because many of those animals are extinct now, and had they not done such very, very detailed descriptions of them, we would have known very little about those animals. And just very quickly, so you know, Lewis described 122 new animals to science. So there were 122 animals, roughly, that were new to science that he was able to collect. And of course, in those days, collecting them meant for the most part, killing them.
Thank you for the question, and thank you to everybody who's asked the question today on the webcast, and we'll get to those other questions at the end. I'll turn it back over to you, Scott, for final closure.
Well, we just want to tell everyone here in New Haven how happy we are to have been able to spend the day in this community. For our internet audience, I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity to make your way down Route 100 in Missouri, that you should stop by New Haven. Absolutely beautiful community, and if you're reading your journals as you make your way across the country, you'll know the place. This is the place just below Bates Island. It's where above Washington, when they passed what is now Washington, Missouri, they passed what they called the retrograde bend, and shortly after that spot is where they talk about the Luder River in the journals, and this is that stretch of river. It's absolutely magnificent, and if you ever get a chance to see it by the water, we'd encourage you to do so, but don't let that stop you. Get in your car, make your way to New Haven. We thank you so much for joining us. We'll join you next week when we're going to be coming from a little further upriver. We look forward to that, and we're also going to be starting our internet broadcast, our video conference broadcast here shortly. Thanks so much, and until we see you next time, we proceed on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, why don't we go ahead and take some more of those questions now, if that's okay, as our